U-boat closing on the starboard bow!
On the afternoon of May 7th, 1915, one of the most heinous acts of war was committed. A civilian liner carrying 1,198 souls was torpedoed by an Imperial German U-boat. This is her brief story. Launched in 1906 by the Cunard Line, the RMS Lusitania embarked on her maiden voyage in 1907. Until losing it to her sister ship Mauretania in 1909, she had been a blue ribbon champion, famous for her luxury and speed. She enjoyed over 200 transatlantic crossings, carrying passengers from all walks of life on the Liverpool-New York runs. She was a floating palace, boasting electric lifts, a 2-story dining saloon, sumptuous lounges, and a palm court with a sweeping view of the sea. Her second and third class accommodations even rivaled that of first class on other liners of the day. Second class was physically separated on its own superstructure just aft of the first, with the dining saloon almost mirroring that in first class. Third class, though more bare-boned, was still airy and comfortable for her less affluent passengers. Her short yet opulent life story would soon take a different course.
On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary and his wife Sophie were assassinated while on a goodwill tour of Serbia. Within weeks, thanks to the tangled web of alliances that Europe had found itself in, the Great War was declared. British shipping such as White Star Line and Cunard had previously signed trade deals with the government that had allowed for their ships to be used for military service. Rival ships like Britannic had been converted into hospital ships, for example. However, though slated for military use, the Lusitania was allowed to continue her civilian transport for the time. The United States by 1915 had maintained its position of neutrality, and Americans, though weary of traveling under wartime conditions, still had pressing matters in Europe, war or no war. On May 1st, as she prepared for her 202nd crossing, the German embassy issued a warning just under Lusitania's advert, reminding passengers that a state of war did exist between Germany and Great Britain, and that the seas around the British Isles were indeed a war zone, that all ships were considered viable targets. Regardless, the Lusitania set sail under the command of Captain Turner with 1,959 passengers and crew, 123 of which were neutral Americans. Unbeknownst to her passengers and arguably a portion of the crew, she was also carrying small arms rounds and shell casings purchased from the United States government as part of a Lend-Lease deal.
The first few days of the voyage, though largely uneventful, were done so under wartime conditions. On Thursday, May 6th, she started receiving warnings from Queenstown of submarines in the area. That night, Captain Turner ordered blackout conditions and sent word to the passengers that they were to enjoy after-dinner cigars indoors. Lifeboats were to be swung out.
Meanwhile, to her north, having set sail the same day as Lusitania, U-20 under the command of Captain Schweiger was on patrol near the southern coast of Ireland. U-20 was part of a brand new form of warfare, subsurface warfare. Britain was a major naval force to be reckoned with. For Germany to defeat Britain, they had to develop a way to sink the ships providing critical supplies and raw materials, effectively cutting her lifelines, attempting to starve Britain into submission. Whereas life on board liners, like the Lusitania, was known to be one of luxury and spacious accommodations, time served on a U-boat was vastly different for its crew. Months on end were spent in dark, damp, cramped conditions. The overwhelming stench of diesel, sweat, and sewage would permeate the air. Here there was a lack of privacy, and certainly no time, let alone room, for the leisure activities as seen above on her intended target. The crew of U-20 and U-boats like her were on constant alert for the numerous perils a submarine would face. Diving too deep would crush her hull. Depth charges from enemy destroyers could crack her hull. Toxic engine and battery fumes, coupled with low oxygen levels, could suffocate and kill an entire crew. It goes without saying, a U-boat's crew would have little to no means of abandoning ship during an emergency. Any target hit would be a tremendous morale boost, while also a huge endangerment garnering attention from enemy ships. Captain Schweiger had a reputation of being ruthless, targeting any ship he would come across on his last patrol, targeting a hospital ship and luckily missing. Despite being known for his tactics, he was respected by his crew as a great captain and had a humorous demeanor. Towards the end of her patrol, low on fuel, morale, and torpedoes, U-20 was notified by wireless that the Lusitania would be in her area and decided to stay one more day before returning to Germany.
The morning of Friday, May 7th, saw the Lusitania entering an official war zone. Captain Turner had repeatedly by this point requested the Royal Navy to escort her, to no avail. Due to the morning fog, he had changed course from the usual zigzag routine in order to get it closer to the Irish shoreline for a better heading. As the fog cleared, all on board could see the coast of the old Head of Kinsale.
At 13:20, nearby, Captain Schweiger spotted smoke on the horizon, which gave way to 4 funnels, realizing the vessel was sailing parallel to the coastline. Noting that the British were by now using passenger liners for troop and supply transports, he gave the order to dive and approach the vessel. A little after 1400, and now close enough to observe her in greater detail, Schweiger was eyeing Lusitania through his periscope. Even though Schweiger clearly identified her as a passenger liner, he gave the order to his crew to fire a single torpedo, thinking it would only give the ship a bloody nose and nothing more. It would strike the ship just beneath the bridge.
Meanwhile, aboard the Lusitania, a little before 14:12 or 2:12 p.m., her passengers were preparing to disembark the following day. Many were either just finishing lunch in their staterooms, repacking their suitcases, or strolling the promenade decks. On the upper decks, deckhand Leslie Morton was looking out over the starboard side of the sea when he spotted a line of bubbles quickly approaching his ship. He raised his megaphone to raise the alarm of the approaching torpedo. Captain Turner only had seconds to give the order for hard to starboard before the torpedo hit just after the helm amidships, followed seconds later by a second and more destructive explosion that sent water and debris in the air. Almost immediately, the Lusitania started taking a heavy list to starboard, making the launch of her portside lifeboats near impossible. In some cases, they were sliding down the decks, crushing passengers and crew in their wake. Lifeboats on the starboard side didn't fare any better. Many fell into the sea while attempting to jump the 4 to 5 foot gap between the boat deck and the boats, and those agile enough to land on the lifeboat found themselves getting thrown into the sea shortly after like China dolls as the lifeboats capsized. Her electricity also failed within minutes, plunging those below decks into the dark and trapping a few passengers in the electric lifts between decks, leaving them essentially caged in as the waters rose above them in the dark. To say the least, it was chaos in her final moments. Some passengers didn't even have time to don life jackets, and those that had were putting them on improperly in the chaos. Towards the end, the great liner slightly evened out from a 25-degree list to a 10-degree one, and it practically dropped like a rock in her final plunge, the foaming water literally washing people off the decks before they knew what hit them. It took barely 20 minutes from torpedo impact to slipping beneath the waves.
In the wake of the sinking, Captain Schweiger was vilified both abroad and surprisingly at home in Germany, for the sinking became a topic of propaganda, the victims becoming pawns in the great game of war. Anti-German riots ensued across the U.S. Although the United States would not enter the war until 1917, this moment would sway public opinion on which side the now neutral nation would be allying with. On board U-20, Captain Schweiger watched as she sank. He would later state that he saw mass panic and confusion amongst the passengers as they ran back and forth on deck, wishing he could do something to help, but knowing there was nothing he could do, instantly regretting her sinking. Looking away, not able to watch events unfold, he changed course and headed home for Germany.
The waters surrounding where the liner had been were now strewn with debris and screaming people struggling to find anything to cling to. The water was roughly 52 degrees cold enough for those in the water to slowly succumb to hypothermia. It would take an armada of fishing boats nearly 4 hours to arrive, far too late for 1,198 of Lusitania's victims. Many of them were women and children, 123 of which were neutral Americans. Notable names like Tycoon Alfred Vanderbilt and Broadway producer Charles Frohman among them. The former, who couldn't swim, was last seen tying his own life jacket onto a mother with a young child, and Frohman quoted his own stage play, Peter Pan. Why fear death? It is the greatest adventure. Less than 300 bodies would be recovered. Today, the Lusitania lies 11.5 nautical miles off the coast of what is now Cobb, Ireland, 305 feet beneath the waves. Her once opulent decks now a distorted pile of wreckage, long since decayed and flattened to the point where her grandeur is barely recognizable. Though she has in some ways become a footnote in the history of war, her story nonetheless lives on, and the memory of her victims shall not be forgotten, even in peacetime. Lest we forget.